I haven't stepped foot underground in 8 months. I sold my climbing gear, I pawned my expensive LiDAR scanning equipment, and I even threw away the hiking boots I used to wear on jobs. If I see a storm drain on the street, I cross to the other side of the road just to avoid walking over the grate. People ask why I quit. I was one of the best geological surveyors in the state. I made good money mapping out uncharted cave systems for mining companies or state parks. I usually tell them I developed a sudden case of claustrophobia or that my knees gave out. But the truth is, I found something down there. Or rather, something found me. It started with the Blackwood system. It's a massive network of limestone caverns in Kentucky, mostly unmapped. My job was simple: map a 3-mile stretch of the Deep Throat sector to see if it was stable enough for a tourist walkway. It's technical work. You go in, you set up laser scanners, you take measurements, and you get out. It is supposed to be boring. The first day was standard. I was about a mile in, squeezing through a section called the gullet, when the tunnel suddenly opened up. That's normal in limestone caves. You crawl through mud for an hour and pop out into a cathedral. But this room was different. It was perfectly spherical, not rough or jagged like natural formations. The walls were smooth, almost polished, like wet obsidian. It was about 40 feet wide, a perfect bubble in the rock. But the weirdest part was the center. In the dead center of the floor, there was a single stalagmite rising up, looking almost like a finger pointing at the ceiling. And resting on top of it was a perfectly round, white stone. I remember thinking it looked like an altar. I did my job. I set up the LiDAR scanner, got a full 3D point cloud of the room, and marked it on my digital map as Chamber A. I spray painted a small orange X on the wall near the entrance, standard procedure to mark the way back, and I ate my lunch there. I remember dropping a wrapper from my protein bar. It fell into a crack near that center stalagmite. I tried to fish it out, but it was too deep. I packed up and left. No bad vibes, no spooky feelings. Just geology. 2 days later, I went back to finish the sector. I retraced my path perfectly. I crawled through the gullet, reached the end of the tunnel, and prepared to step into the spherical room. But I hit a wall. Literally. The tunnel just ended in jagged, solid limestone. I stood there for 10 minutes, staring at my GPS tracker. The coordinates were correct. I checked my paper notes. Correct. I checked the digital map I'd made 48 hours ago. According to the data, I should be standing in the middle of a 40-foot wide room. Instead, I was staring at a rock face that looked like it had been there for 1,000,000 years. I figured I was tired. Maybe the gases down there were messing with my head. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn in the labyrinth. It happens. I backtracked and took a different fork, heading down into a lower section called the sump. This was wet, miserable work. Cold water up to my waist, tight squeezes. I was 2 full miles, away from where that spherical room was supposed to be. I turned a corner, shivering, looking for a dry spot to rest, and my headlamp hit something reflective. My heart stopped. The tunnel opened up. The walls became smooth, polished, black. I stepped inside. It was the same room, the exact same dimensions, the same perfect sphere, the same stalagmite finger in the center. I told myself it was just a twin formation. Geology repeats itself, right? It's rare, but maybe the water flow here created the same shape. I walked to the center. I looked at the stalagmite, and then I looked into the crack at the base. Wedged deep inside was the foil wrapper of my protein bar. I felt the blood drain out of my face. The temperature in the cave felt like it dropped 20 degrees in a second. I spun around, looking for the entrance, scanning the walls with my light. There, on the smooth black wall, was the orange X I had spray painted. This wasn't a similar room. This was the same room, but I was 2 miles deeper and 300 feet lower than where I had been 2 days ago. That's when the smell hit me. The first time, the room had smelled like damp rock. Now it smelled like ozone, like a thunderstorm mixed with something coppery, like old, dried blood. I backed out. I didn't run. You can't run in a cave without breaking your neck, but I moved as fast as I could. I scrambled back through the water, up the ropes, and out into the sunlight. I sat in my truck for an hour, just shaking. I told myself I was done. I was going to call the client, tell them the sector was unstable, and quit. But I'm a man of science. I deal in hard data, and the data didn't make sense. Buildings don't move. Caves don't teleport. I needed to prove there was a rational explanation. Maybe there were 2 rooms, and I dropped a wrapper in both. Maybe someone was playing a prank on me. I had to go back one last time. I waited 3 days. I brought extra lights, a backup oxygen meter, and a pistol. I don't know why I brought the gun. It just felt necessary. I went in a different entrance this time, a vertical drop called the Chimney, about 5 miles east of the original site. I wanted to be as far away from those coordinates as possible. I just wanted to map a completely different area to get my confidence back. I rappelled down 200 feet. I was in a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It was tight, claustrophobic work. The silence down there is heavy. It presses on your ears. I was shimmying sideways, looking for a foothold, when I felt a draft. Caves breathe. Air moves from high pressure to low pressure. A draft usually means a large opening nearby. I felt relief. A large room meant I could stretch my legs. I squeezed through the crack and dropped down onto a flat floor. I didn't even need to raise my headlamp. I knew. The floor was smooth. The acoustics changed instantly, the echo becoming sharp and metallic. I slowly raised my light. I was in the room. Again. 5 miles away from the first spot. 2 miles from the second. But it had changed. The orange X was still there on the wall. But the paint looked old. It was faded, peeling, like it had been there for decades. And the stalagmite in the center? It wasn't just a finger of rock anymore. It had grown. It twisted up toward the ceiling in a spiral, looking less like rock and more like a calcified vine. And the sound. It wasn't silent anymore. There was a sound coming from the walls. A low, rhythmic thrumming. Thump thump. Thump thump. It vibrated through the soles of my boots. It sounded exactly like a heartbeat, massive and slow, surrounding me. I turned to leave, to scramble back up the fissure I had just dropped out of. The fissure was gone. The smooth, black wall was solid behind me. There was no seam. No crack. No exit. Panic is a cold thing. It doesn't make you scream immediately. It freezes you. I stood there, trapped in a stone bubble miles beneath the earth, realizing that the geology wasn't static. The cave was rearranging itself. It was hunting. Then, the walls started to sweat. Thick, viscous liquid began oozing from the smooth black stone. It smelled of sulfur and rotting meat. The thumping grew louder. Thump thump. I realized the room wasn't just a space. It was an organ. It was a stomach. I ran to the center, to the only thing that wasn't a wall, the twisted stalagmite. I frantically scanned the room for any opening. High up, near the ceiling, about 30 feet up, I saw a small shadow. A vent. I had to climb the stalagmite. I scrambled up the wet, slick rock. My hands were shaking. The thumping was so loud now it hurt my ears. The walls seemed to be pulsing, actually contracting inward, shrinking the room. I reached the top of the spire and jumped for the ledge of the vent. My fingers caught the edge. I pulled myself up, scraping my chest raw against the stone. I kicked my legs, scrambling inside the narrow tunnel, just as I heard a wet, sickening crunch from below. I looked back. The room hadn't just shrunk. The floor had surged upward, slamming into the ceiling exactly where I had been standing seconds ago. If I hadn't climbed, I would have been crushed into paste. I didn't stop crawling. I didn't check my map. I just crawled upward. I crawled until my fingers bled, squeezing through gaps that should have been impossible to fit through. I heard the shifting of rock behind me, the grinding of tectonic plates moving faster than nature allows, chasing me. I popped out of a foxhole in the middle of the woods, 3 miles from my truck. It was night. I walked the whole way back to the road, keeping my light off, terrified that if I turned it on, I'd see that smooth black stone again. I drove home. I typed up my resignation letter that night. But here is the part that keeps me awake. Here is why I can't sleep without the TV on. A week after I quit, I was processing my data files, getting ready to hand them over to the company. I pulled up the 3D scan of that first encounter, the first time I mapped the room. I looked at the coordinates. Then I overlaid the coordinates of the second time I found it. Then I manually input the rough location of the third time. I connected the dots on the map. The room isn't just jumping randomly. It's moving in a spiral, an upward spiral. Each time it appears, it's closer to the surface. I calculated the trajectory. Based on the distance it traveled between the first and third sighting, and the speed at which it's rising, it should breach the surface tomorrow. And according to my calculations, the center of the next appearance isn't in the woods. I'm sitting in my living room right now. I live in a house with a basement. About 10 minutes ago, I heard a sound from downstairs. It wasn't the furnace. It was a low, rhythmic thumping. And just now I started to smell it. The smell of ozone and rotting meat. I'm not going down there to check. I'm grabbing my keys, and I'm driving until I run out of gas. If you ever see a perfect, smooth circle of rock appear in your backyard, don't go in. It's hungry. I haven't eaten bread in 6 years. I don't eat pasta, I don't eat cereal, and I sure as hell don't bake anything with flour. If I'm at a restaurant and the waiter brings a basket of rolls to the table, I have to ask them to take it away. I can't even look at it. People think I'm gluten intolerant. I usually just nod and let them believe that. It's easier than explaining that I know what's actually in the supply chain. It's easier than telling them about the Miller County Co-op, Silo Number 4. I used to be a confined space inspector. It's a niche job, high risk, high pay. My specialty was agricultural storage, grain silos. If a sensor broke, or an auger got jammed, or a company bought an old abandoned mill and needed to know if the concrete was still structural, they called me. There is a rule in this industry: grain is like water. It flows. It has currents. And if you step into it wrong, it will drown you just like the ocean. We call it engulfment. It takes about 4 seconds to be buried to your waist, and once you're there, the pressure is so intense you can't breathe. This happened in late October, just as the harvest season was dying down. I got a contract to inspect an old facility out in rural Nebraska. The place had been shut down for a decade, a foreclosure situation. A big conglomerate had bought the land and wanted to know if they should demolish the silos or refurbish them. My partner, Dave, stayed in the truck to monitor the radio and the winch. That was standard procedure. I was the one suiting up. The structure was a concrete monolith, one of those 100-foot giants you see rising out of the cornfields like a tombstone. It was a bank of 6 silos. My ticket was for number 4. I remember the climb vividly. The metal ladder was rusted, vibrating in the wind. It was cold that day, the sky that bruised purple color you get before a storm. When I reached the catwalk at the top, 120 feet in the air, the view was endless. Just dead cornstalks and gray sky. I walked to the hatch of Silo 4. It was padlocked. That was good. It meant no kids had been in there partying. I cut the lock with my bolt cutters, cracked the seal, and the smell hit me. Usually, old silos smell like dust and mouse droppings. Sometimes, if the grain has gone bad, it smells sour like vinegar. This didn't smell like that. It smelled sweet, sickly sweet, like cheap perfume trying to cover up the smell of wet dog. I radioed Dave. I told him the air quality meter was reading a little weird. High humidity, but oxygen levels were fine. I clipped into the tripod winch, turned on my headlamp, and began the descent. The darkness inside a silo is absolute. It's a physical weight. My beam cut through the floating dust particles, illuminating the concrete walls. They were cracked, stained with years of residue. I was expecting the silo to be empty. The paperwork said it had been drained 10 years ago, but as I lowered past the 60-foot mark, my boots touched down on something soft. I signaled Dave to stop the winch. I looked down. There was a heel left in the bin. A heel is a pile of old grain that doesn't drain out naturally because it's stuck to the sides or the floor. This was a big heel, maybe 20 feet of corn, compacted and rotting. But the surface wasn't conical. Grain piles naturally form a cone. This was flat, packed down. I unclipped from the main line, keeping my safety tether attached. I took a step. The corn was solid, almost like concrete, crusted over from years of humidity. I started my inspection, walking the perimeter, tapping the walls with my hammer to check for delamination. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just an old, empty bin. Then I saw the corner. Silos are circles. They don't have corners. I shined my light toward the center of the bin. The grain there had been stacked. Intentionally. The rotting corn had been mixed with some kind of binding agent, maybe mud, maybe saliva, I don't know, to create a low wall, about 3 feet high. I walked over to it, my heart doing a little flutter in my chest. You find weird stuff in abandoned places. Raccoons, owls, drifters. I stepped over the little wall. Inside the enclosure, the floor had been swept clean. The corn husks were woven together to make a mat. And in the center of the mat, there was a table. It wasn't a real table. It was made of dried corn cobs lashed together with twine, perfectly balanced. On top of the table sat a single, pristine white ceramic plate and a silver fork. I froze. The silence of the silo pressed in on my ears. I could hear my own blood rushing. This wasn't a drifter crashing for a night. The hatch had been padlocked from the outside. The lock I cut was rusted solid. Nobody had come through that top hatch in years. And there are no doors at the bottom of a silo, only discharged chutes that are 6 inches wide. I crouched down to look at the plate. It was clean, polished. Next to the table, there was a row of jars. Mason jars. I shined my light through the glass. They were filled with a cloudy, amber liquid. Floating inside were things. Small things. I picked one up. It was heavy. I wiped the dust off the glass. It was a sparrow. A whole bird, feathers and all, pickled in the jar. I put it down, my hand shaking. I shined my light around the rest of this nest. There were other things. A pile of clothes neatly folded. But they weren't normal clothes. They were worker uniforms. High-visibility vests, faded to white. Blue coveralls. Hard hats. I picked up a hard hat. It was cracked right down the middle. On the inside rim, a name was written in Sharpie. Peterson. My stomach dropped. I knew that name. Everyone in the tri-state area knew that name. Mark Peterson. He was an inspector like me. He'd gone missing in 2015. The police assumed he'd run off on his debts. They found his truck parked at a rest stop 3 counties over. But his hat was here. I keyed my radio. Dave. Dave, bring me up. Now. Static. Dave. Nothing but white noise. The concrete walls were too thick. I was cut off. I stood up, panic starting to prickly at the back of my neck. I needed to get back to the rope. I turned toward the center of the silo where my winch line was dangling. It was swinging. There was no wind in here. But the yellow rope was swaying back and forth, gently, like a pendulum. I shined my light up. The rope disappeared into the darkness above. Then I heard it. Scritch. 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 It wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the walls. I spun around, sweeping my beam across the perimeter. The crusted grain along the edges of the silo was moving. Not flowing, shifting. A chunk of the hardened corn wall fell away, revealing a dark hole. A tunnel. Something was living inside the walls of the grain. I backed up, my boots crunching on the dried corn. "Who's there?" I yelled. My voice echoed, sounding small and pathetic in the massive chamber. From the dark tunnel in the grain, a head poked out. It was human, but it wasn't right. The skin was pale, almost translucent, like a grub found under a rock. It had no hair. Its eyes were fused shut, covered by a thick film of cataracts. It had been in the dark for a long time. It sniffed the air. Then it smiled. Its teeth were filed down to points. It didn't crawl out. It slithered. It moved through the grain the way a seal moves through water. It dove headfirst into the loose corn and vanished. I didn't wait. I lunged for the winch rope. I grabbed the carabiner and clicked it into my harness. I slammed the up button on my control pendant. The motor whined. The rope went taut. I lifted 6 inches off the ground. Then the motor stalled. I looked up. The rope was shaking violently. Someone or something was up there on the catwalk, messing with the winch. But Dave was in the truck. Below me, the grain floor erupted. A hand shot out of the corn. It grabbed my ankle. It wasn't a normal grip. The fingers were incredibly long, the nails thick and curled like talons. It squeezed so hard I felt the bones in my ankle grind together. I screamed and kicked out with my other boot. I stomped on the hand, hearing a sickening crunch, but it didn't let go. It pulled. The winch motor groaned, fighting against the weight. I was being stretched, suspended in the air. Then a second hand shot out. It grabbed my other leg. The face surfaced again. It was right below me. Up close, the smell was unbearable, ammonia and rotting meat. The creature opened its mouth and let out a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a roar. It was a mimicry. It sounded exactly like my radio static. Kirsachekt. Then, underneath the static, it spoke. It used a voice that wasn't its own. It sounded tinny, recorded. "Copy that, Silo 4. All clear." It was Peterson's voice. It was mimicking the last thing the dead man had said. I panicked. I did the only thing I could think of. I unclipped my heavy flashlight, a 3-pound maglite, and dropped it. Gravity did the rest. The heavy metal tube fell 6 feet and smashed directly into the creature's face. There was a wet thud. The creature shrieked, a high, piercing sound like metal on metal. The grip on my ankles loosened just for a second. I kicked frantically, pulling my legs up to my chest. I hit the up button again. The winch caught. I jerked upward, 5 feet, 10 feet. The creature lunged, snapping its jaws at my boots, but I was out of reach. I didn't look down. I kept the button held down. The ascent felt like it took hours. Every inch, I expected the rope to snap. I expected to see another one of those things crawling down the walls to intercept me. When I reached the top hatch, I didn't just climb out, I vaulted. I threw myself onto the metal grating of the catwalk and scrambled backward, hyperventilating. I looked at the winch motor. It was jammed with a bone. A human femur had been shoved into the gears, trying to sabotage the mechanism. I slammed the hatch shut. I took the chain and wrapped it around the handle so many times my hands were bleeding. I didn't have a lock, so I used a carabiner and jammed it shut. I practically slid down the ladder. I ran to the truck. Dave was asleep. He had his headphones on. He hadn't heard a thing. I drove. I didn't explain anything to him until we were 50 miles away. We called the cops. We told them we found evidence of a squatter and possible human remains. We didn't tell them about the creature. They would have locked me up. A SWAT team went out there the next day. They cut the side of the silo open to drain it, rather than sending men in from the top. I wasn't there, but I heard the report from a buddy on the force. They found the nest. They found the jars. They found Mark Peterson's hard hat and his wallet. But they didn't find the creature. What they found was a tunnel system. The grain in that silo hadn't just been sitting there. It had been honeycombed. There were tunnels leading deep down, below the concrete foundation, into the earth. And they found the bones. When they sifted the grain, they found thousands of bones. Raccoons, deer, stray dogs, and 3 other human skeletons. But here is the kicker. Here is the part that made me quit the industry forever. They traced the tunnel. It didn't just go into the ground. It went sideways. It connected to Silo 3, and Silo 2, and Silo 1. Silo 1 wasn't empty. Silo 1 was the active shipping bin. It had been distributing grain to bakeries and processing plants all over the Midwest for the last 5 years. The police found drag marks in the connecting tunnels. The creature hadn't just been living in the abandoned silo. It had been using it as a pantry. It was hunting in the active silos. It was pulling things and people down into the grain, pickling them and eating them. And the leftovers? The dust, the dried fluids, the ground-up bits of bone that didn't get stored in the jars? That just got mixed in with the corn. It got sucked into the auger. It got loaded onto trucks. It got ground into flour. The authorities hushed it up. Contamination event, they called it. They recalled a few batches, blamed it on a rat infestation. But they didn't recall 5 years' worth of grain. It was too late for that. It was already in the bread, the crackers, the pizza dough. So I don't eat flour anymore. Because I know that sometimes that crunch in the crust isn't a burnt seed. And every night, when I'm lying in bed, I listen to the scratching in my own walls. I tell myself it's mice. I pray it's mice. But sometimes, just as I'm drifting off, I hear a sound that makes my blood freeze. I hear a voice, soft and static-filled, coming from the vent. Copy that. All clear.